Hey guys, it's Chris at Highline Guitars, and you're watching another episode of From the Luthier's Workbench. If you like to build or repair guitars, I suggest you click that subscribe button down below, and you'll become part of a community of fellow luthiers. And together, we can take your skills to a whole new level. If you'd like to support my guitar building YouTube channel, visit eguitarplans.com and buy a plan. A link is in the description below. Now on with the video. Hey guys, in this episode of From the Luthier's Workbench, I'm going to be covering part 20 of the Highline Echo Laminated guitar build. And in the last episode, part 19, I had installed the pickups and the electronics. And I have several things that I have planned for this episode, but I've had to, once again, pump the brakes. You'll remember a while back I had level sanded and polish sanded and buffed out the guitar. Then I decided to strip it all off, spray new finish, and re-level and re-sand it because I was trying some new and different abrasive products. Well, in the last episode, after I had installed the pickups, and after I had posted the video, I went back in and I was making some adjustments, and in the process, I broke one of my flamed maple pickup rings. So what I had to do was remove the rings and replace them with new ones. So what happened was, when I made these pickup rings, I had carved it on my CNC machine, and I placed the wood on the CNC machine with the grain oriented to go through the major dimension of the ring. And that made it weak in areas near the mounting screw holes as well as the height adjustment screw holes. So, it was just a matter of time before it snapped and broke. And, wooden pickup rings are pretty fragile to begin with. But what I decided to do instead was to cut new pickup rings. But this time I placed the wood in the CNC machine so that the grain is running across the minor dimension. Now what that does is it makes the area where the mounting screws and the height adjustment screw holes are stronger, so less prone to breaking. Now it does mean that this area in here is going to be a little bit weaker. But that really doesn't matter because there isn't a lot of torque being applied to these parts of the pickup ring, so I'm not that concerned with it, and I think it'll be just fine. But after I made the rings on the CNC machine, I gave them a light sanding and then saturated them with water-thin CA glue. Let it soak in, thoroughly dry and cure. Then as an added level of precaution, I mixed up some 30-minute epoxy, and I actually brushed it on and let it kind of flow out and level, and then just let it harden and fully cure. And that gave it a much more durable, less breakable result. So hopefully we'll see. I'm pretty confident it's going to hold up pretty well. But what I want to do is finish these off, get them installed, and then we'll see if I can get to installing the tuners and making the nuts. So without further ado, let's jump in and get started. Now, unfortunately, I neglected to show the process of sealing these with CA glue and the epoxy, but it's pretty standard process. What I am going to show you though is what I'm currently in the process of doing, and that is toning them. And what I'm using is Crystal Lac's warm tone dye solution. I love this stuff. It's amazing. And what I do is I'll mix it with a little bit of the Crystal Lac bright tone to act as a really good binder. And then I just brush it on to the surface, and it gives it that really nice warm amber color. And that way the rings will match, the tone of the rings visually will match the guitar, the rest of the guitar itself, because the rest of the guitar has a very warm hue to it. So that's what I'll do right here. And then once that's dry, I'm just going to put a couple of coats of Crystal Lac Bright Tone Clear over the top to protect it. Pretty simple. Now, before I continue on, I got a comment with a suggestion from a viewer about installing one of these barrel jacks or panel jacks, whatever you want to call them. When I had installed this, I tightened the nut and then added some thread lock. And the viewer suggested that I not use the thread lock because that will just make it really difficult to remove the jack in the future should there need to be any sort of repair work or service work done. So what he suggested was that first to install a rubber washer onto the jack and then tighten the nut against the rubber washer. That'll keep it locked into place and prevent it from getting loose. And it'll also make it easy to remove the jack for service later on. Unfortunately, however, I don't have a rubber washer large enough to fit on here. And I could run out to the hardware store and purchase one, but I'm trying to minimize my trips outside during this spike in this global pandemic crisis we're facing. So instead, what I opted to do was to install the jack using using two nuts basically. The first nut tightens it down against the body, and then the second nut acts as a jam nut to keep it from getting loose and coming out, but it'll make it easy to remove the jack later on if it needs any sort of service or repair work. So that's something to consider. Now here's another boo-boo that I should talk about. One of my viewers commented that whenever he's soldering the controls into the back of his guitar, he'll make sure that the entire surface is completely covered to prevent damage to the finish while he's working. And normally I try to do the same thing. I'll lay pads all around this so that if solder were to splash off of my soldering iron, it would land onto the pad and not onto the surface. But in my haste to make the video, I neglected to do that, and I paid the price. I had a couple of drops of hot solder land on the finish. So what I did was I took an X-Acto knife and just carefully picked off those couple of pieces of solder. And then I sanded the finish with some 400 grit sandpaper in this area. And then I went back and brushed on a couple of coats of Crystalac Bright Tone. So right now I'm just letting this thoroughly cure out. It's been about a week, so I'm almost ready to go back and level sand and then rebuff this. That should only take about an hour. But really, when you're doing work like this in the back of your guitar, after you've applied and buffed out your finish, it's probably a good idea to make sure you cover that surface to prevent damage. So you definitely want to do that. And I normally do, but when you're making guitars and shooting video at the same time, there's a whole nother set of issues that you have to be aware of. So that's why this happened. All right, well, on to installing the tuners in the headstock. And the tuners that I'll be using are these really nice locking hip shot tuners. These are very well made, very durable, excellent function, and affordable priced. So the way I've done this is typically I will drill holes into the headstock, and these holes are 3/8 of an inch in diameter, and they were drilled with a brad point drill bit. Now, the portion of the tuner which will fit into this hole is this portion of the barrel, and it has a slight taper. It's a little bit narrower at the top than it is at the base. And as it stands right now, because of the finish that I applied, which is built up in there, the tuner isn't going to fit into the hole. Now, I like these tuners to fit as snug as possible so that there's absolutely no lateral movement in any direction. If there is, if it's loose fitting in there, it can be really difficult to tune the guitar and to keep it in tune. So in order to get those holes sized properly, I could drill a slightly larger hole that would exactly match the largest diameter but then again, I'm going to have that problem with the tuner wobbling in the hole. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use a reaming tool. And I've been using this for a lot of years, and I've marked it where I need to ream to in order to size the hole properly for the tuner to fit nice and snug. But I will ream this out, and periodically I will stop to check and see if the tuner is going to fit, and it should fit nice and snug all the way in, and that is not going to move. That's nice and snug. So I'll just continue reaming these and getting all the tuners fitted into the headstock. Now, to keep the tuners from spinning around in the holes, they're held in place with these extremely small, teeny tiny wood screws. And in order to install these safely without them breaking, I'm going to have to drill some pilot holes. So I'll use a 16th inch drill bit, and I'll use a piece of tape as a depth stop so I don't drill it too deep. And then to prevent the head of the screw from breaking off as I tighten it down, I'm going to be scraping the threads into some Minwax paste furniture wax, and that helps to lubricate the threads as I tighten them into the wood. All right, so now what I'm going to do is tighten down the nuts on the front, and this is just a 10mm socket. So I'll tighten these, and then I'll flip it over and double check the screws on the back to make sure that they are adequately tight and that nothing is going to move around. All right, guys, well, that's all the time I have for this episode. If you have any comments or questions, be sure to post them down below, and I'll do my best to answer them as politely as I can. Always remember, there's no such thing as a stupid question. However, there are some stupid people who like to ask questions. Anyway, as always, if you enjoy watching videos on making guitars, be sure to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell for notifications, all that good stuff. And if you want to show some support for what I'm doing here, visit eguitarplans.com, purchase a plan to build a guitar or a plan to make one of the different kinds of tools that I like to use when I build guitars. And as always, take care, stay safe, and I will see you in the next episode.